so that they're able to dispel rumors, get accurate information, and be able to make timely decisions. Started here in just one quick minute with hearing from Rachel Smith from King County, and we also will be hearing from Tony Williams from Washington, two advocates after Rachel. So just a quick logistical details to take care of. First, I want to thank our sponsors. Business Health Trust and the Chamber, as I mentioned, are putting on this series really geared towards serving our members and providing information in this time. Thank you to our event sponsor, Advanced Professionals Insurance and Benefit Solution also. Logistically, if you have questions during this webinar, please use the question and answer panel, or use the chat box, sorry. And if you have questions for the speaker, use the question and answers box. So if you need help during the webinar, use chat. Questions for our speakers, we will use the question and answer box. We will try to get to some questions, but given just how much information both of these individuals will be sharing with us, we will do our best to address all of the questions. We will have a recording of this webinar available on our event page, and that will be sent out in a link via email from the Chamber Events team after this webinar. So with that, we're going to start with a polling question, just to get a feel for where people are at when they're logging in right now. So we will open a chat panel. What county are you in currently? King County, Snohomish County, Pierce County, or other? Great, and we'll close that out. Looks like the majority, about 80%, are in King County. So wonderful to have Rachel Smith here from King County to speak with us. And our second polling question, where do you go for the latest and most accurate information about COVID-19? All right, looks like most people have selected answers, so we will close that out. Thank you very much for participating in this so that we can also help identify where people are going and where we can also promote more resources. It looks like the state and the county website is one of the top, or is the top choice for the most accurate information. It's a great place to be getting real-time and accurate information. And with that, I would like to introduce Rachel Smith, Deputy Executive of King County. Rachel, would you give a brief introduction and tell us about what this stay home and stay healthy means for businesses and individuals?
Absolutely. So yes, my name is Rachel Smith, Deputy King County Executive and Chief of Staff here for King County. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you to all of the business community folks who have stepped up and are supporting government, supporting our community, and doing just a ton of work to help us get through this. I really want to give a heartfelt thank you. So I think a couple of things. I think it might be helpful to just do a quick basics and then answer your question. So I think, you know, folks understand, but the COVID-19 virus it's a respiratory disease. It is, you know, things like heavy breathing, coughing, contact, and really a small percentage of people are going to get significantly sick from this disease, but those people who do get really sick are at a very great risk. And so you know, this is a disease that doesn't have any pharmacological treatments. So there's nothing you can do if you go into the hospital to get treated. There's no vaccine. So when we talk about community mitigations, which is what I'm going to talk about here in a moment, that really is the thing that we can do to stop the spread of disease. So as the outbreak has started here in our community, we have taken a series of progressively stronger steps. These steps are authorized by the local public health officer, also authorized by the governor's orders. And we have been in lockstep not just with the governor's office, but also with with Pierce and Snohomish counties as we have done this. And all of the measures have been in service to provide social distancing for individuals, to try to limit the interactions folks are having with high touch surfaces, and to really try to stop the spread of disease and bring down the curve, which is something that I think people have heard a lot. The most recent governor's order that sort of sweeps up and captures everything that we have been doing over the last 3 to 4 weeks really is an order to stay home and stay healthy, which I know you all have heard. This differs a little bit from some of the other language that you've heard other communities using in terms of shelter in place and things like that, but a lot of the policies that underlie it are not dramatically different. We meaning this state, this community, have been on the front lines of enacting really strong policies. And also I can talk in a moment a little bit more about what we're seeing in some of the modeling and data as a result of those strong mitigation policies. So essentially what the governor's order says is stay home as much as you can. If you can telework, if you can work from home, do so. If you can work safely with 6 feet between you and the person that you're working with and your customers, you can still do that. And those essential businesses are still allowed to continue under this order. All gatherings are currently banned. So we had gone from 250 gatherings to 50 gatherings to no more gatherings. But we do want to encourage people to continue to go outside and get some fresh air. Please do so safely. Please do so keeping 6 feet between you and other individuals. And also make sure that you are getting what you need so that while you're at home, you have food, you have medication, you have what you need to be able to stay safe and stay healthy. So I'll pause there.
Great, thank you. That was some just really good baseline for us as we're looking at this. Rachel, what do you recommend for businesses that are making decisions, evaluating if they're essential or not, so that they can be getting real-time information that's accurate? Where should they go? What sorts of things should they be thinking about?
Yeah, so I think that there's, this order was announced on Monday, so everybody has been working fast and furiously to try to get up as much information online as possible. So I do encourage people, and your poll showed this, to go to the state and King County Public Health's website to get material. I encourage people to actually download the governor's order and download the essential list of businesses, and I can send links to both of those things and see if you fit in any of those categories naturally. I can also tell you that the governor's office is standing up a website where you will be able to submit a form to send that in to either, my understanding is it is to request to be considered essential, or to get clarification on whether or not you are an essential business. And I think, the reality is all of us, the enterprise I'm in charge of, in addition, King County is a business as well. We provide services and have 16,000 employees. So we're doing our own work. For example, we have just gotten clarification, which the governor put out yesterday, on construction projects. We are now looking at that clarification for our own public works and other essential public projects. And we will be giving guidance out to all of our divisions to say, these are the projects that can continue from a construction perspective. These are the ones that need to be paused. And for those that are continuing, these are the standards that we expect either our own staff or the contractors to meet in order to do those jobs and continue to do them safely. So I think there's a lot of good online resources. More of those online resources are coming. I also, and I've said this in a lot of the business calls that I have been on, really, my door is open. If people have questions, if people need information, please contact me directly, and we'll make sure you get routed where you need to.
Thank you. And the resources that you mentioned, we will include in our follow-up as well, so that those are made directly available to all the participants. Talk to me about the standards for retail and grocery stores, restaurants that are doing takeout, some of the businesses that are staying open, like how they can do social distancing, suggestions around best practices.
Absolutely. And we are glad that those businesses are staying open and being safe while they do so. Dow made a quip the other day that if this pandemic is sort of memorialized by the respirator mask or the face mask, let us have the takeout container be our recovery symbols. We are heartened by that. And I will say, just, anecdotally, I think businesses are doing a really good job. I want to acknowledge, because I think it's just important to say out loud, that it is hard to take this guidance and then figure out how to make it practicable for your unique business. And, I so wish that we had the public health resources right now to be able to actually go in and do one-on-one work with businesses to implement this guidance, but we simply don't have the resources to do that. So we have tried to do our very best to put out clear information, infographics that you can hang in your places of business, that you can share with employees, that you can give out to customers, so that people can see what the public health expectation is for you as a business. And then you can also be sharing with your customer, this is what I'm doing to make sure that you're safe. So we're trying to make those resources available as much as we can. I think, for restaurants and takeout, one, obviously making hand sanitizer and hand washing available for your employees all the time. One of the good things about restaurants is that you already have to follow a bunch of health guidelines. So if you are doing that, you are probably a very clean and sanitized place. So everybody that's got your excellent rating, good for you being, prepared for this kind of virus, but also doing things like keeping customers 6 feet away to pick up their goods from where the rest of the staff is doing whatever work they're doing, cooking, putting things in boxes and preparing. We've encouraged, limiting hot food and things like that at grocery stores. Speaking of grocery stores, I think there's a lot of creativity that we public health have embraced that actually came out of the industry. Things like having early hours for folks who are in the vulnerable category, having, tape on the floor so that people know where they should stand vis-a-vis the cash register. Things like metering lines and limiting the number of individuals who can come in at any given time. And I also just want to encourage people to be vocal. If you are in a restaurant and you've got 3 people waiting for takeout and they are standing too close together, tell them to spread out and spread apart. So that's just some of the things that we're recommending. And, I am also urging businesses to talk amongst each other, to share best practices. Your industries better than we do. So if we've given you guidance and you have found ways to implement that, that feels, really effective and creative and also serving your customers well and your employees, share it with each other.
Yeah, sharing the best practices is really helpful in this time. I would encourage anybody on the call to use the chat function to share some of the things that you're doing. We can collate these and make these available so that we can continue to brainstorm in this time of what might be working. I went to a takeout restaurant yesterday and noticed something really creative that they did. They actually used sidewalk chalk outside to indicate where people should stand, because inside it was very small. So they had, little areas and instructions, wait here. So I was impressed by the creativity there of just using some sidewalk chalk to be able to do that. And there were also, some little cute drawings and stuff. So lots of creativity out there right now. Rachel, we have a question from Barb Wilson. Can you say a little bit more about construction projects that are a go versus a no-go?
Yeah, I can. So the governor sent out additional clarification yesterday. And so I don't know if that's something that you guys have circulated, but I would encourage you to do so. So there's a couple of categories of exempted, meaning it can continue construction. So public works, which, are defined as, basic projects that, government does to keep up streets, to keep up sidewalks, to, build infrastructure and that kind of thing. Also, projects that are deemed essential by government. So, you know, there are some, for example, public-private partnerships and things like that are being perhaps not delivered entirely by government, but are in fact essential government infrastructure. So those projects are also in the exempted category. And then also projects that are in sort of a, I guess, in a state where additional action needs to be taken to secure that project. So we have some projects that are simply in a vulnerable state and can't stay in that state for months on end. And so additional work will either need to continue to get them into a state where they can pause or continue that work. So those are kind of the three main exemptions in construction. That being said, I do really want to emphasize those are exempted, presuming that you can also do them safely and in accordance with public health guidelines. So that is sort of where we are in the directives at this point, which is there are some things that are essential businesses that are allowed to continue. There are some, you know, retail activities that can go on, construction activities that can go on. They still all have to be done in accordance with public health guidance. Now, with some of our construction projects, that may mean that we have a little less productivity or they're not quite as effective because maybe you can't have as many people on site, et cetera. But that is, you know, that will just have to be what it be, and project timelines may need to be adjusted accordingly. So that's kind of the short version of what is and isn't allowed on the construction front.
Thank you. That's helpful to put some guideposts around as people are starting to think how they fall into that.
And
could you talk to us
add really quickly that we are
yeah.
the City of Seattle and Sound Transit and some of the other major public partners to say, you know, let's make sure we have kind of similar standards, if not exactly the same standards for our projects, so that, you know, our union workers on the job know that whether they're on this job or that job, they're going to be safe and they're going to be able to expect the same kinds of things.
Great. Could you talk to us a little bit about testing? Who should get testing? How should they get tested? There's been lots of federal talk around it, state talk, and I think one of the areas that just hearing directly from public health and from authorities is really going to be helpful for people.
Yeah. So this is tough. This is a frustrating area for our overall response, frustrating both because of the challenges and because it is critical. And we do not have enough testing capacity in this region, period. So a couple of things. One, as a reminder, there are kind of three resources when we think about testing that are necessary and or could be barriers. One is the administration of the test. Two is the test material itself, so those swabs and the medium. And then three, the lab analysis. I will say right now in our community, local lab capacity is not currently an issue. For hospitals, for King County Public Health, for City of Seattle or other jurisdictions, we have been ordering our tests directly from FEMA. That's how we have gotten our tests. The reality now is that with the outbreak sweeping across the country, those resources are so limited and they're now being doled out, you know, across jurisdictional boundaries. So there's simply not enough testing to get there. We were very encouraged when the federal government said they were planning to provide tens of thousands of additional kits to our community. Been a lot of challenges there. One, the actual number has been a moving target. So it was like 10,000 and then it was 4,000, and it's just been a real issue. And then the other major issue, and I will sort of spare everybody all of the details, but there's just some ineffectiveness in what the federal government is asking us to do. So for example, they are saying that we have to send those tests to specific labs that can take somewhere between 4 and 8 days to get results back, even though here in our own community, we have lab capacity to turn around results in one single day. So we are trying to work through those issues with the federal government. It is a frustration. At the same time, we are trying to develop our own resources here in our community, sort of on a parallel track in our own community. We're trying to develop our own media. We're trying to get our own swabs and resource supplies. One thing that was good news is that the FDA approved the home testing kits. So, so I'd say we're kind of in two tracks. We are trying to continue to work with the government to get resources here. We are also trying to, as we have had to do with a lot of things in this response, making our own way here locally and regionally and statewide to try to solve our own problems and support our community. The other thing I'll say about testing, because I think it is important, is, and it also just speaks to the desperate need we have for testing. Testing is important for two things. One, it is important for the individual. It is important for them to know their status, to talk to their healthcare provider. It's important for them to be able to talk to those people that they have been around or come in contact with if they have vulnerable people living in the home. So testing is critical and personal in that way. Testing is also critical for us to actually understand this pandemic and understand what is happening with this disease. So, when we look at how our mitigations or community mitigations are working, for example, we need to be doing a lot of testing to actually be able to see, like, are these working? Also, we have this sort of interesting question around children. We know that children are not getting sick, at least. We don't know if they're getting the disease. They're not getting sick in the same way that adults and older adults are. Like, what does that mean? Are they carriers? And without being able to do that testing, we're not being able to paint the picture of what this virus is doing in our community. So log that under just my own personal frustration around why it is so important, why we really need it for both of those reasons, and why the limitations that we are feeling here are really debilitating both for the individual and for the community-wide response.
Yeah, I know one of the things that I've heard you and other public health officials talk about over the last few weeks is, the limitations of supplies and just the barriers to testing. I believe some folks have been also saying, talk to your healthcare professional, use virtual care to, if you're symptomatic or starting to go through those, don't just go to the ER, don't just go into a clinic. So just kind of reminding folks about that. It's wonderful because the federal government and our state government have both really expanded virtual care abilities in our state right now. So it's a really convenient way to talk with somebody and to see if you need to get tested and how you can get tested. Well, Rachel, I really very much appreciate all the work that you are doing. You've been just on the ground, boots on the ground, day in and day out on this. So thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us. We have time for maybe one more question. Will there be some point, at some point, will there be testing to see if people had the disease and recovered without knowledge of it at the time?
That is a great question. So yes-ish. I think the answer is yes. But I can sort of just read into what is happening right now. So for example, the Seattle flu study, which is an independent thing, it's not part of King County, but that study collected a whole bunch of samples. And so they're able to go back and test those samples now. And so if we can then communicate with those individuals who, tested positive in November, for example, we might be able to understand a little bit more about what was happening with the disease in our community then. So yes, I think we are meaning the scientists and smart people in our community who are doing research, are looking at ways to, what look back can we do with existing material to try to test that, to understand, in that sort of second bucket that I talked about like understanding the pandemic. I think right now, because of limited testing, we simply have to focus on individuals who need testing. So there's some research going on right now, but they really are kind of separate. And the focus right now is on testing for immediate understanding for individuals in the pandemic. But I'm glad that we at least, have opportunities like the Seattle flu study to go back and look. I do think it will help our understanding.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. We very much appreciate it. We will welcome our second Williams, who will be talking to us about the federal stimulus package, just the so this is very, very timely. Tony, let's open up a polling question. What is the most confusing piece of information, or what are you having the most trouble finding out? When to go to the doctor, what businesses are or can be open, how to get tested for COVID-19, and what financial support is available to me or my business, and other. All right, and we will close this out. What financing and financial support is available to me in my business? 68%. Well, this is good that this is a question, because I think Tony is going to be able to shed some light on what the federal government is able to do in these areas, both for individuals and businesses. We also will be having We Got This WA webinar series next week that will be focused on small business loans and also best practices around how to get some sort of debt relief and talking with landlords, etc., other vendors. So be on the lookout for that invitation as well. So with that, I'd love to welcome Tony Williams. Tony, welcome, and thank you for your time.
Well, good morning. We didn't do a mic check on me first. Am I working okay for you?
You're working perfectly.
Excellent. Excellent. And I've closed the door to my home office here, so the dogs or the boys should not bother us. So good luck.
It's just part of reality these days, right?
That it is.
So tell us what's happening in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm putting in quotes breaking news, because most of you have probably seen it through news alerts, but the House of Representatives about, 30 minutes ago, passed the $2.2 trillion, what we call the emergency response legislation here in our firm, as opposed to a stimulus bill, and we'll come back to that maybe later in our discussion. And I'm going to start with, we can all have our views about various pieces of political activity and how you view about the two parties and how you view about Congress and how you feel about Washington, D.C. and all that. And we could go on for hours about all that. But I've been involved in things in Washington, D.C. for over 30 years now. And the last 8 or 10 days or 2 weeks from a legislative standpoint and activity standpoint has truly been extraordinary. And my career includes, post 9/11, it includes the meltdown in 08, 09, where there were massive pieces of legislation passed, but there's never been anything like this. And to think about the fact that when the emergency response legislation, what we call COVID, putting them into buckets, we're calling them, there's COVID-1, which passed a couple of weeks ago, which was the first piece of emergency response that was then quickly followed by COVID-2, which was another piece of response. All of those were designed to try and get money to healthcare people and to the states and things like that. This COVID-3, as we call it, and there will be a COVID-4, 5, 6, 7 over the next several months for sure. Started out, the first piece of bidding was like $1.2 trillion. And by 7 days later, what's been passed today, actually I saw a news report, it may be actually more close to now $2.3 trillion in money and tax benefits and things like that going out to the American people. So it's just unbelievable. And to see things move as fastly as they have, as quickly as they have, has been really, really quite amazing. So the key details, I think, for the group on this call, there's direct payments to individuals. There's that big chunk of money, and you see on the PowerPoint there who qualifies for that. There is a massive expansion, both in amount of dollars and in weeks on unemployment benefits. And quickly, there's $600 on top of what people are eligible for in their states, and they've added an extra 4 months to how long you can be on it. And that was that I won't get into details on that and somebody cares, but that there was a scrum over that in the Senate yesterday or Wednesday around that particular issue. But at the end of the day, it was resolved and both sides stood down, and there's extra dollars plus extra time. And then I think the other thing I think that's really, really important to people on this webinar is what's available for small businesses. And so there's $350 billion of small business loan money, and it goes up for businesses 500 employees or lower. You can access these loans. Just saw Will this, oh, no, sorry. So sorry, I got distracted by the little bubbles. I'll keep focused on my notes. So these loans, $350 billion of them available. And essentially you will go through a local lender to access these loans. They're really for, payroll, benefits, pay your rents and bills and things of that nature. And the huge thing here on this is if a small business is able to maintain payroll during the period of the loan, for if you do 8 weeks of keep people employed and are paid and all of that, the loans are there's a forgiveness component to these loans. So one, there, if you choose to you can't meet some of the forgiveness things, the loan repayment the interest on them is 4%. But I think the forgiveness component is really a huge part of this. And it's also, the goal here is to essentially, get as much money out to people as possible. And while people are either, if they are unemployed, there's going to be more money through that, or if they have a job and they're trying to help business owners continue to meet payroll. You'll see some other things on here. There's various tax issues. There are, there's some modest rent forgiveness type things where if you are a, say, landlord, building owner, you can suspend payments for 30 days, and there's 2 30-day extensions to that. That stuff requires more paperwork than the small business assistance loans. I mean, there is not much of a paperwork requirement for that part. I guess.
So Tony,
yeah.
I have a couple of questions. So going back to what you were talking about on assistance for individuals, let's start there. So the federal government is essentially expanding the unemployment insurance program.
That is
for
correct.
the state of Washington. You mentioned the $600 on top of what people qualify in the state. Is that a formula that gets adjusted, or is it a flat amount for everyone who is receiving unemployment benefits?
Yeah, well, so that was the fight. So at one point, the bill slowed down for several hours on Wednesday when some conservative members were arguing that essentially this was paying people to not work, to choose not to work, because they would actually be getting more money by not working than by working. And part of the argument was political, and part of the argument was each state has a different formula and all of that. Well, about that time, just a little bit of inside baseball. It just is some levity is always interesting. Well, about that point, Bernie Sanders reemerged into the Senate chamber for the first time in months from his presidential campaign and threatened to block the bill over this particular fight. And you had Republican senators like calling out their own members of their own who had created this provision. And I mean, it was very messy for several hours. And finally, at the end of the day, the Republicans who were raising their objectives obviously chose to file them away. And as I understand it, as I've read through some stuff multiple times, it's just a flat $600 per week through your, you file through your state unemployment and you get these benefits. you know, and again, now there, I will say, I'll read this part. Unemployment benefits under the program would be available to individuals who are in quarantine, caring for a diagnosed family member, or out of work because their employer closed due to the coronavirus. It will also apply to those who are self-employed, have limited work history, or otherwise wouldn't qualify for unemployment benefits. I mean, that is so broad that, you know, I think everyone will be able to access these.
Yeah, so that's my understanding as well. I actually just got off of a call where the unemployment commissioner, Susie Levine, was talking about this. And one of the things, she knew we were having this call. She wanted to make sure that employers and employees knew that they are already in the process of building out the infrastructure to be processing claims and to incorporate this new expansion, but that it will probably take 2 to 3 weeks to really be implemented. These claims are going to be allowed for retroactive, which is really great. Tony, is it also accurate that the expansion of the unemployment benefits expands to gig workers, to folks that might not have met the 680-hour requirement with the state, and or self-employed?
Yeah, that was another part of the, I think part, you know, remember when you look back and it was like last Friday, the idea was like on Monday, this stimulus bill, this response bill was going to be passed by Monday. Well, part of what started holding it up were details like what we're talking about right now. And the answer to your question is yes, all those other kinds of workers are going to be included in this, and including self-employed, including the gig economy types and all of that. So like I said, my sense is it's quite broad.
And when we're so now kind of shifting to the business side, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things coming out in the next few days around small business loans and how to access that program. I just wanted you to kind of restate just the loan forgiveness piece. I know there's lots of questions on that. And then a follow-up question for you would be, you know, from your firm, if you guys get any resources that we can connect folks with on those small business loans, we will push those out to our members.
Yeah, so I think, you know, this is if you want to, in my personal view, the most important thing that's about to happen in the United States of America from our economic standpoint is that we, the collective, we help people manage this loan process as best as we possibly can. I mean, people are going to, you know, the checks, you're either going to get a check, or if you're signed up for, if you qualify, you're either going to get a check in your mailbox, or if you're signed up for direct deposit, you're going to get it banged into your account. If you're unemployed, you know, that process, most people have an understanding of what to do. This is a whole new world. And it is also one of the biggest parts of the whole thing. And it's essentially, you know, while it's going to be, you know, run through the Small Business Administration, you know, you're going to end up, those who seek this funding are, you know, going to end up, you know, dealing with their local bank and things like that. And so you also, I think your accountants are going to have this kind of information. And we're trying to collect, we're actually working with a couple of our city clients. We have municipal clients, including Rachel Smith at King County, but also the city of Bellevue and the city of Auburn and some other places like that. And we're trying to help them make it easy for people to get this. And so as we come on to stuff, sure, I'll send anything and everything your way. So, you know, I am not a benefits expert. I'm a guy who lobbies, who spends some of his time lobbying in DC and then some of his time working here. I live in Bellevue area. So I want to say, you know, don't take my stuff to the bank. You're going to want to talk to the bank, and you're going to want to talk to your accountant and all that. But so I'll just kind of a couple of key things here is, so loans are going to be available to the covered period for any business, nonprofit, veterans group, or tribal business with 500 and fewer employees. sole proprietors, independent contractors, and eligible self-employed workers, hotel and food service chains with 500 or fewer employees per location. So that last two, I hadn't even noticed that until this morning, per location. So the idea here is, so eligible recipients could receive loans for as much as 10 million or 250% of their average payroll costs, and interest rates will be capped at 4%. The loans are to cover eligible payroll costs, salaries, leave, benefits, as well as mortgage interest and utility payments. And all you have to do is make a good faith certification that you'll use the funds to retain workers, maintain payroll, and pay for rent and similar expenses. And that is where, the forgiveness comes in. And I think some of this is going to have to be, again, as this kind of rolls out, clearly people are going to want to understand the forgiveness deeper. But as everything we've read so far is, and I'll just read one paragraph of some of the stuff we pulled together. So recipients of the SBA guaranteed loans. So again, the federal government will guarantee the loans. You'll get the loans through your local lender. Could apply for loan forgiveness over 8 weeks for eligible payroll costs and for mortgage, interest, rent, and utility payments. And again, the only way you would give up the loan forgiveness is if you fire people, lay people off or cut their pay. So, to me, this is a really, really important provision, and also something that, we in the business community need to help our fellow people in the business community, access these funds.
Yeah, that's a pretty important provision for us to understand. I guess just recapping and what I've heard, now is a great time to start those conversations with your banker to see what might be available for your company through this. So you mentioned at the beginning why you don't refuse a stimulus bill. I'm curious as to why.
Well, because it really is a response bill. I mean, so one, the goal is to flood the system with money so that people can pay their bills and pay their people, or provide funding for the states to pay unemployment and try to, keep the economy somewhat afloat. Secondly, so that's of the $2.2 trillion, that is the biggest piece of it. The second biggest piece of it is funding for healthcare providers, for our hospitals and everybody else who are working every day to keep people alive and do testing and get supplies and all that. And then the third piece is funding directly to states and local governments to help with, again, all of the response activities. And they have, it's pretty remarkable. Again, Tony's can be a fairly cynical guy sometimes about political things and government things, but this bill contains direct funding to state and local governments, funding to transit agencies that are underwater right now. It even includes money to the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities to provide some funding help for those in the arts community, and there's housing assistance and all these kinds of things. And is it enough? I'm sure it's not. And we're already hearing that. And like I said, there'll be other pieces of legislation to come, and we can, if you want to talk about that. But it is a response mechanism here, and again, an extraordinary amount of money. And one thing I guess I want to push too is, there's we live in a very divided country, of course, for all kinds of reasons. And I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, and she's definitely politically more aligned with the MSNBC, Bernie Sanders type folks. And she said, well, how much is in there for corporate bailouts? And we're good friends. So she was just asking me questions. I said, well, it's really by far the smallest component of the legislation. Yes, there are there's 50 to 60 billion dollars in there for the airline industry and those affiliated with the airline industry, cargo, and their contractors like the bag handlers and things like that that you see at SeaTac. And there's this $17 billion that is referred to as the Boeing language. It's not specifically for them, but it's a $17 billion loan program for companies deemed to be critical to national security. And the only company that would probably be eligible for this funds is probably Boeing. And there's some back and forth about whether they'll even seek them. But, you know, I mean, you can consider the small business loan component some corporate bailout because of the 500 employees or less, but you know, those are small businesses, as we all know. So that's why I call it a response bill. And you know, what I expect to happen next is Congress is now gone. They're not going to be in DC for the next at least 4 weeks, perhaps longer. And there's already work now on what I would consider to be a stimulus bill, which we're going to call COVID-4, which right now the talk is it'll be mostly a transportation infrastructure bill, similar to, if you'll remember, the 09-010 shovel-ready project type stuff that the Obama administration pushed out. But, you know, given that between now, let's say that legislation were to pass in mid-May, you know, between now and mid-May, a hell of a lot's going to happen in the U.S. And so, and also we're going to, you know, be able to know where the gaps are from this $2 trillion piece of legislation. So I can imagine COVID-4 being a component of economic stimulus through infrastructure projects and other things. And also there'll be another piece of response legislation for sure. And then, you know, next fall, if we get to the other side of this, starting next fall and next winter, there's going to be a look back component of this. That's why we talk about COVID 5 and 6, where there'll be a commission created similar to 9/11 to look at all the things that could have maybe been done better that would have prevented some of this mess and some of those things. So there'll be a lot happening on all of this for many months to come, for sure.
So there are lots of questions, particularly around the small business loans piece. You know, from what you know of this, and I know you know, you're not the loan person, right? But
Right.
From what you've heard about this, if people have already laid off employees or put them on standby, et cetera, has anybody talked about how that plays into kind of a go forward of bringing workers back on payroll and the loan forgiveness, or is that a detail that still needs to get worked out?
Well, so that's a great question. So I'm learning myself. So again, you know, those details, right, I think are going to be to come, and questions are, I'm sure all kinds of people are going to have questions. So I'm sensing and those of you, so first, while I own my own business, I have a business partner who does all the business of the business. My job is to work with clients and bring in business, and everybody owns a business knows there's two different kinds of people, those who bring it in and those who manage it, and you don't want me managing it. So I give you that. But I am learning as well over the last few days a lot of interesting pieces of terminology that come into play. And there's the difference between furlough, as I understand it, where you're still paying somebody's benefits and you're essentially putting them off to the side until things get better, and outright this person has lost their job. So one, I think there might be some questions around exactly what people are asking. Well, I've already had to lay people off. So one, I think that's some stuff to be sorted out. And two, right, I mean, here's what's going to happen is people are going to go and seek these loans, and there's going to be all these questions around, well, if I have this money now and I've laid people off, if I treat it as if they're still working for me and cover payroll, is that going to be forgiven and all that? And you know, all I can tell you is everything I've read right now, it's hard for me to give you the specific bit of detail around.
Right.
And that
Yeah,
will,
the details of the pandemic response really are changing on a daily basis. I really appreciate you taking the time to, you know, talk us through what was approved 52 minutes ago by the House, and giving us your insights of, you know, what's in this bill and what does it mean for small business owners and individuals. Just a follow-up logistical item, we will be sending out a summary of what Tony was talking about, as well as the slides and other resources, along with the webinar recording after this email. I encourage folks to follow Business Health Trust and the Seattle Metro Chamber on Facebook to stay up to date. A lot of great resources and updates are posted regularly, and the small business funding loans is really a top priority of the Seattle Chamber to help members get connected with those resources. We're also really staying up to date with the Washington unemployment insurance and really figuring out how those changes are going to be implemented. If you didn't type your questions in the question and answer box, please do that now. Lots of questions we will be able to follow up after the webinar, so you can also email directly to the Chamber after this if you're thinking of something at a later date. Thank you very much for your time. We hope that this webinar helped you get a look in happening in our state right now, and also what is happening federally.